Right now, somewhere in the world, a small group of people are living completely different lives than everyone around them. Not because they were born smarter, not because they got lucky, not because they have more hours in their day than you do. Every single person on this planet gets the same 24 hours, no more, no less. But this small group, roughly 1% of the population, has learned something the rest of the world has not. They know how to use their time in a way that actually builds the life they want, instead of watching that time disappear into distractions, excuses, and days that blur together without meaning. You already know the feeling of reaching the end of a day and wondering where it went. You already know what it feels like to plan something important and then quietly let it slip because something easier came along instead. This is not because something is wrong with you. This is simply what happens when nobody has ever shown you how the 1% actually think, how they move through their mornings, how they protect their focus, how they handle failure, how they guard their energy from people and habits that drain them without permission. This book is going to show you exactly how they do it. 10 clear principles, explained simply, built for real life, not perfect conditions. By the end, you will understand precisely what separates people who waste their time from people who never do. And more importantly, you will know exactly what to do starting today to become one of them. Chapter 1. Master your mornings to take control of your day. The alarm goes off. It is still dark outside. Your body is warm under the blanket, and every instinct inside you says, stay right here, just 5 more minutes. Nothing bad will happen if you wait a little longer. This is the first battle of the day, and most people lose it without even realizing they are in a fight. They reach for the phone before their feet touch the floor. They scroll through messages, news, and other people's lives before they have even had a single thought of their own. By the time they finally get up, their mind is already cluttered, already reactive, already behind. The day has started, but they have not. This is where everything begins, not with big decisions, not with dramatic life changes, but with something as small and ordinary as how you handle the first hour after you open your eyes. The people who separate themselves from everyone else, the ones who build extraordinary lives while others stay stuck in the same patterns year after year, they understand something simple but rarely practiced. The morning is not just the start of the day, the morning is the day. Whatever happens in those first 60 minutes sets the tone, the energy, and the direction for everything that follows. Think about the last time you woke up late, rushed out the door, skipped breakfast, forgot something important, and spent the whole day feeling like you were chasing your own life instead of living it. That feeling did not start at noon. It started the moment you hit snooze. On the other hand, think about a day when you woke up early, took your time, moved your body, had a clear head, and walked into your first task with focus. That day felt different. You felt in control. You felt like the day belonged to you instead of the other way around. This is not about luck. This is not about being a morning person by nature. This is a skill, and like every skill, it can be built through practice and repetition. The people who master their mornings are not born with more discipline than you. They made a decision at some point to stop letting the day happen to them and started making the day happen for them. That decision is available to you right now, in this very moment, as you listen to these words. Here is the truth that most people never sit down and think about. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your habits. And no habit shapes your life more directly than what you do the moment you wake up. If your first act of the day is checking notifications, comparing yourself to strangers on a screen, and consuming information you did not choose, you are training your mind to be reactive. You are teaching yourself, day after day, that your attention belongs to whoever grabs it first. Over months and years, this becomes your identity. You become someone who responds instead of someone who creates. Now flip that. Imagine waking up and giving yourself even 20 minutes before the outside world gets access to your mind. 20 minutes of silence, of stretching, of drinking water, of writing down 3 things you want to accomplish. In that short window, you are sending yourself a message that matters more than any words could. You are telling yourself that your mind is valuable, that your time is valuable, and that you are the one who decides how your day unfolds. That message, repeated every single morning, becomes the foundation of a completely different life. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice, because wisdom without action is just entertainment. The first shift you need to make is protecting the first hour of your day from noise. This means your phone stays away from your hand for at least 30 minutes after waking up. I understand this feels difficult at first, almost uncomfortable, because so many of us have trained ourselves to reach for it out of habit rather than need. But discomfort is not a signal to stop. Discomfort is a signal that you are doing something that actually changes you. Put your phone on the other side of the room. Use an actual alarm clock if you have to. Make it physically inconvenient to check your phone first thing, because willpower is unreliable, but environment is not. The second shift is movement. Your body has been still for hours. Blood flow is slow, your mind is foggy, and your energy is low. Movement wakes up your entire system. This does not mean you need an intense workout at 5 in the morning. It can be as simple as 10 minutes of stretching, a short walk outside, or a few rounds of basic exercises like push-ups and squats. The goal is not to exhaust yourself. The goal is to signal to your body and mind that the day has started, and you are ready to engage with it. People who move their bodies in the morning report feeling more alert, more positive, and more capable of handling stress throughout the day. This is not a coincidence. Movement changes your chemistry. It releases the very hormones that help you feel steady and clear-headed instead of anxious and scattered. The third shift is hydration. Your body loses water while you sleep, and dehydration in the morning contributes directly to feeling tired, foggy, and irritable. Before coffee, before anything else, drink a full glass of water. This simple act rehydrates your system and gets everything moving in the right direction. It sounds too basic to matter, but small physical acts compound into how your entire day feels. Do not underestimate anything that seems too simple to work. Simple and easy are not the same thing, and simple is often exactly what works because it is sustainable. The fourth shift, and perhaps the most powerful one, is giving yourself a few minutes of silence and reflection before the demands of the day take over. This can look different for different people. Some sit quietly and breathe. Some write down their thoughts on paper. Some simply sit with a cup of tea and think without any goal in mind. The purpose of this time is not productivity. The purpose is presence. It is a chance to hear your own thoughts before they get buried under emails, messages, and other people's demands. People who skip this step often feel like they are living someone else's life, constantly responding to what others need from them, rarely pausing to ask what they actually want for themselves. 5 or 10 minutes of silence in the morning can restore that connection to your own mind. The fifth shift is planning your day with intention instead of letting it unfold randomly. Before you get pulled into tasks, take a few minutes to write down what actually matters today. Not everything on your to-do list, just the 2 or 3 things that, if completed, would make today a genuine success. This single act changes how you move through your hours. Instead of reacting to whatever demands your attention loudest, you are working from a plan you created with a clear mind. You are the author of your day, instead of a character reacting to whatever plot twists show up. Now, someone listening to this might think their mornings are already too rushed, too full of responsibilities, too tied to other people's schedules to make room for any of this. Children need to get ready. Jobs need to be commuted to. Life does not pause simply because you want a peaceful morning. This is real, and it deserves respect. But here is what is also real. You do not need 2 hours to reclaim your morning. You need 10 minutes. 10 minutes before anyone else in your house wakes up. 10 minutes in the car before you walk into work. 10 minutes on the edge of your bed, with your eyes still adjusting to the light. It is not about the amount of time. It is about the quality of ownership you take over that time. Even 10 intentional minutes will change how your entire day feels compared to 0 intentional minutes. Consider the difference between two people living completely different lives simply because of how they choose to begin their day. One wakes up, checks their phone immediately, feels a small spike of anxiety from a work message, scrolls for another few minutes without noticing, and finally gets up already feeling behind before the day has properly started. Their morning is a blur of rushing, and this rushed, reactive energy follows them into every meeting, every conversation, every decision for the rest of the day. The other person wakes up at the same time, but they do not reach for their phone. They drink water, stretch their body for a few minutes, sit quietly and think about what they want from today, and write down their top priorities. By the time they start their formal workday, they have already accomplished something. They have already proven to themselves that they are in charge of their choices. This confidence carries forward into everything else they do. This is the real difference between people who feel like life is happening to them and people who feel like they are shaping their life. It rarely comes down to circumstances. It comes down to these small, repeated choices made in the quiet, unnoticed minutes of the morning when nobody else is watching and nothing about the moment feels significant. But everything significant in your life is built from moments exactly like this one. Nobody transforms their life through a single dramatic decision. They transform it through hundreds of small decisions, repeated with consistency until those decisions become identity. Discipline in the morning is not about punishing yourself or forcing yourself into rigid perfection. It is an act of self-respect. When you choose to protect your mind before the world gets access to it, when you choose to move your body, when you choose to sit in silence and plan with intention, you are telling yourself, without needing to say a single word, that you matter enough to be taken care of first. This is not selfish. This is necessary. You cannot give clarity, energy, and focus to your work, your family, or your goals if you have not first given those things to yourself. Start tomorrow, not next Monday, not after some perfect moment arrives when everything else in your life is settled, because that moment will never come. Tomorrow morning, before you touch your phone, drink a glass of water, move your body for a few minutes, sit in silence and think clearly, even if just for 5 minutes. Write down what actually matters for that day. That is it. That is the entire practice. It does not require special equipment, expensive courses, or perfect conditions. It requires only a decision, repeated daily, to take back the first hour of your life. The people who never waste time are not superhuman. They are ordinary people who understood one simple truth earlier than everyone else. Whoever controls the morning controls the day, and whoever controls their days, one after another, eventually controls the direction of their entire life. Your mornings are where your future is quietly being built, minute by minute, decision by decision. Master them, and you will find that everything else, your focus, your energy, your confidence, your results, begins to fall into place behind you. Chapter 2. Eliminate distractions that silently steal your precious hours. A single notification arrives. Your phone lights up for half a second, a small buzz against the table, nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. But your hand moves toward it anyway, almost without your permission, as if some part of you has been trained to respond before your mind even decides to. You check it. It takes 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds are never really 3 seconds. They pull you out of whatever you were doing, and it takes minutes, sometimes much longer, to find your way back to the same level of focus you had before. This happens dozens of times a day for most people, and almost nobody notices it happening. This is how hours disappear without a trace, not through one big event, but through 1,000 tiny interruptions that feel harmless in the moment and devastating when added together at the end of a week, a month, a year. Distraction does not announce itself as the enemy. It never feels like a threat. It feels like relief. It feels like a short break from effort, a quick escape from the discomfort of concentration. This is exactly why it is so dangerous. If distraction felt bad, you would avoid it naturally. But it feels good, even soothing, which means you have to consciously decide to resist something that your brain is chemically wired to enjoy. Every scroll, every notification, every quick check of a screen gives your brain a small hit of stimulation. Over time, your mind starts craving that stimulation the way it craves anything pleasurable, and suddenly deep focus starts to feel uncomfortable by comparison. This is not weakness. This is a pattern that was built through repetition, and patterns built through repetition can be unbuilt the same way. Think honestly about your own days. How many times have you sat down to do something important, something that actually mattered to your goals, only to find yourself 20 minutes later looking at something completely unrelated with no memory of how you got there? This is not because you lack intelligence or ambition. It is because your environment has been engineered, often deliberately, to fracture your attention into smaller and smaller pieces. Every app on your phone is designed by people whose job is to capture your focus and hold it as long as possible. You are not just fighting your own habits. You are fighting systems built by teams of people whose entire purpose is to make distraction irresistible. Understanding this changes how you see the problem. This is not a personal failure. This is a battle, and like any battle, it requires strategy, not just willpower. The people who accomplish extraordinary things are not immune to distraction. They feel the same pull toward their phones, the same temptation to check one more notification, the same craving for something easy instead of something meaningful. The difference is, they have built systems that protect their attention instead of relying on willpower alone. Willpower is a limited resource. It gets weaker throughout the day, especially after you have already made dozens of small decisions. This is why relying purely on discipline to resist distraction eventually fails for almost everyone. What works instead is designing your environment so that distraction requires effort to reach, while focus requires none. Start with your phone, because for most people, it is the single largest source of stolen time. Turn off notifications for anything that is not truly urgent. You do not need to know the moment someone likes a photo or comments on a post. You do not need every app fighting for your attention throughout the day. Go into your settings and turn off everything except messages and calls from people who genuinely matter. This single change alone will remove hundreds of tiny interruptions from your week. Beyond that, consider physically separating yourself from your phone during periods when you need to focus. Put it in another room. Leave it in your bag. Give it to someone else to hold if you have to. The goal is to make the distraction require effort to access, because most people will not go through extra steps just to check something meaningless, but they will absolutely respond to a notification sitting right in front of them. Next, look at your workspace itself. A cluttered space filled with things unrelated to your task creates constant micro-decisions and micro-distractions. Every object your eyes land on that does not belong to the task in front of you pulls a small piece of your attention away. Clear your space before you begin important work. This is not about aesthetics. This is about reducing the number of things competing for your mind. A clean, simple environment allows your brain to settle into one task instead of quietly negotiating with a dozen visual distractions at once. Now consider the people around you, because human distraction is just as powerful as digital distraction. Some people, without meaning any harm, will constantly pull you into conversations, complaints, and unimportant chatter that drains your time and energy. This does not mean you cut people out of your life. It means you become intentional about when you are available and when you are not. Protecting focused time sometimes means telling someone directly that you need an hour of uninterrupted work, and that this is not personal, it is necessary. Most people respect this boundary once they understand it comes from purpose, not coldness. There is also a quieter, more internal form of distraction that deserves attention, and that is the wandering of your own mind. Sometimes the biggest interruption is not your phone or another person, but your own thoughts pulling you toward worries, daydreams, or unrelated ideas in the middle of important work. This is where a simple practice becomes powerful. Keep a small notebook nearby while you work. When an unrelated thought interrupts you, whether it is something you need to buy, a message you need to send, or a worry about tomorrow, write it down in a single line and return immediately to your task. This tells your brain that the thought has been captured and does not need to be held onto right now. This small habit prevents your mind from constantly trying to interrupt itself in fear of forgetting something important. One of the most effective tools for reclaiming your time is working in focused blocks rather than open-ended stretches. Choose a task, set a timer for 25 or 30 minutes, and commit to giving that task your complete attention until the timer ends. No phone, no switching tasks, no checking messages. When the timer ends, take a short break, then begin again. This structure works because it gives your mind a clear boundary. Instead of facing an overwhelming, undefined stretch of time, you are simply committing to a short, focused sprint. Most distractions lose their pull when you know a break is coming soon. You are not denying yourself forever. You are simply asking for a small window of complete presence. It is worth being honest about something many people avoid admitting. Distraction is often not really about the phone, the notifications, or the noise around you. Distraction is frequently a form of avoidance. When a task feels difficult, boring, or emotionally uncomfortable, distraction becomes an escape route. Reaching for your phone in the middle of a hard task is rarely about genuinely needing to check something. It is about avoiding the discomfort of effort. Recognizing this changes everything, because it means the real skill you are building is not just avoiding distraction, but learning to sit with discomfort long enough to push through it. Every time you resist the urge to escape and instead stay with the difficulty in front of you, you strengthen your ability to focus the next time it gets hard. This muscle grows exactly the way physical strength grows, through repeated resistance against something that would be easier to avoid. Consider what becomes possible when you reclaim even 2 focused hours a day that were previously lost to scattered attention. 2 hours of deep, uninterrupted work is worth more than 8 hours of fragmented effort, pulled in a dozen directions. Over a single year, 2 focused hours a day adds up to hundreds of hours returned to your life, hours that can be poured into skills, relationships, health, and goals that actually matter to you. This is not a small change. This is the difference between a life that feels scattered and reactive and a life that feels intentional and directed. The world will not stop trying to steal your attention. Every app, every notification, every distraction has been designed to compete for your focus, and this will not change simply because you decide to care about it. What changes is you. You start protecting your attention the same way you would protect anything valuable, because your attention is genuinely one of the most valuable things you own. Every hour reclaimed from distraction is an hour returned to your goals, your growth, and the life you are trying to build. Guard it fiercely, because nobody else will guard it for you. Chapter 3. Build unbreakable focus. To finish what truly matters. There is a particular kind of person who can sit down at a desk, open a single document, and stay with it for 2 hours without once feeling the pull to check anything else. People watch this and call it talent, as if some individuals were simply born with the ability to concentrate, while others were not. This is one of the most damaging myths about focus, because it convinces people that deep concentration is a fixed trait rather than a trained capacity. Nobody is born able to sit still and think deeply for hours. Every person who demonstrates that kind of focus built it deliberately, often slowly, often through failure, through starting and stopping 100 times before it became natural. If they built it, you can build it too. Focus is not simply the absence of distraction. You can sit in a silent room with your phone in another building and still fail to focus, because your attention scatters internally, even when nothing external interrupts you. Real focus is a decision, repeated moment by moment, to bring your mind back to one single point again and again, no matter how many times it wanders. This is the part almost nobody explains properly. Your mind will wander. This is not failure. This is simply what minds do. The skill is not preventing your mind from ever drifting. The skill is noticing quickly when it drifts, and gently, without frustration, guiding it back to the task in front of you. Every single time you do this, you strengthen the mental muscle responsible for concentration, the same way lifting a weight strengthens a physical muscle. Most people give up on focus the moment it becomes difficult, mistaking the difficulty for evidence that something is wrong with them. They sit down to work, their mind wanders after 10 minutes, and they conclude they simply cannot concentrate today. But difficulty is not a sign of failure. Difficulty is the entire process. Anyone who has trained a muscle in the gym knows that the moment of struggle, the point where lifting feels hardest, is exactly the moment where growth happens. The same law applies to your mind. The discomfort you feel when trying to stay with a hard task longer than feels natural is the exact moment your focus is expanding. If you quit the instant it gets uncomfortable, you never give yourself the chance to grow past your current limit. One of the deepest truths about unbreakable focus is that it requires you to care deeply about what you are focusing on. It is far easier to concentrate on something connected to a goal that genuinely matters to you than something you are doing without any real reason behind it. Before beginning important work, take a moment to remind yourself why this particular task matters, not the surface reason, but the deeper reason underneath it. Are you building toward financial independence? Are you trying to become someone your family can be proud of? Are you trying to prove to yourself that you are capable of finishing what you start? Connecting a task to a real, personal reason gives your mind something to hold on to when the natural urge to wander appears. Purpose acts like gravity, constantly pulling your attention back toward what matters most. A practical foundation for building unbreakable focus starts with choosing a single task before you begin, rather than approaching your work with a vague sense of needing to be productive. Vague intentions produce vague focus. Sit down and decide, specifically, what you are working on for this session. Not a general area like work or study, but a precise task like finishing the second section of a report or completing 20 practice problems. Specificity gives your mind a clear target, and a clear target is far easier to stay focused on than a broad, undefined goal. Once you have chosen your task, remove every other option from your immediate environment. This means the same discipline discussed around distraction applies here directly. Your phone should not be within reach. Other tabs on your screen should be closed. If you are working from a device, consider using tools that block access to unrelated websites and apps during your focused session. The fewer alternatives available to your attention, the easier it becomes to stay with the one thing you have chosen. This is not weakness, this is intelligent design. Even the most disciplined people benefit from removing temptation rather than constantly resisting it through sheer force of will. Time itself needs structure for focus to hold steady over the long term. Nobody, no matter how trained, can maintain intense concentration indefinitely without a break. Trying to force yourself through hours of unbroken effort often backfires, leading to burnout and eventually complete avoidance of the task altogether. Instead, work in defined stretches, somewhere between 25 and 50 minutes depending on the difficulty of the task, followed by a short break of 5 to 10 minutes. During the break, step away completely. Move your body, look outside, drink water. Do not use the break to check your phone, because this reintroduces the exact stimulation you are trying to train your mind away from. After several of these focused blocks, take a longer break of 15 to 20 minutes. This rhythm allows your mind to recover its ability to concentrate instead of slowly draining it until nothing is left. There is a particular moment that happens during almost every focused session, usually somewhere between the 10 and 20-minute mark, where your mind suddenly produces an intense urge to stop, check something, or switch tasks entirely. This moment feels urgent, almost unbearable, as if something truly needs your attention elsewhere. Nearly every time, this urge has nothing to do with genuine necessity. It is simply your mind testing whether you will hold the boundary you set. If you learn to recognize this specific moment and simply wait it out, staying with your task for another 5 or 10 minutes without giving in, the urge fades almost completely. This single skill, recognizing and outlasting that specific wave of resistance, is one of the most powerful tools for building focus that lasts. Most people give up exactly at the peak of difficulty, right before it would have gotten easier. Physical state affects mental focus far more than most people acknowledge. Trying to concentrate while exhausted, dehydrated, or having eaten poorly is like trying to run a race with your shoelaces tied together. You are fighting your own body while also trying to fight distraction. Before demanding deep focus from your mind, make sure you have given your body what it needs. Adequate sleep the night before matters more than almost any productivity trick. Water throughout the day keeps your brain functioning properly, since even mild dehydration measurably reduces concentration and mental clarity. Food that provides steady energy, rather than sugar that spikes and crashes, keeps your focus stable rather than erratic. None of this is complicated, but all of it is frequently ignored by people who wonder why their focus feels weak, despite trying every mental trick available. Unbreakable focus also requires protecting your mind from starting the day already scattered. If you spend the first hour of your morning consuming unrelated information, your mind enters your important work already fragmented into a dozen different directions. This connects directly to how you begin your day, because a mind that starts calm and clear has a far easier time settling into deep concentration later. Carrying this thread from earlier practices into your focus sessions creates a compounding effect, where every good habit reinforces the next. There will be days when, despite every strategy, focus still feels impossible to hold. This is normal and does not mean you have failed or lost the skill you have been building. Some days your mind is simply more resistant, whether from stress, poor sleep, or emotional weight you are carrying. On these days, lower the bar, rather than abandoning the practice entirely. Commit to just 10 focused minutes instead of 30. Often, once you begin, the resistance fades and you find yourself continuing far longer than planned. But even if it does not, 10 minutes of genuine focus is infinitely more valuable than an hour of scattered, half-hearted effort. Consistency in showing up matters more than perfection in every single session. What truly matters in your life, the work that will define your career, the relationships you are trying to strengthen, the skills you are trying to master, none of it develops through scattered attention, spread thin across 100 directions. It develops through sustained, repeated focus given fully to one thing at a time. Every person who has built something meaningful, whether a business, a body of work, a skill, or a transformed life, did so by protecting their attention fiercely and refusing to let it be pulled apart by everything competing for it. This is available to you the same way it was available to them. Choose one task, remove what pulls you away from it, return your mind gently every time it wanders. Do this again tomorrow and the day after, and you will find that focus, once foreign and difficult, becomes as natural as breathing. Chapter 4. Transform small daily habits into massive lifelong results. Picture a single drop of water falling onto a stone, day after day, at the exact same spot. On the first day, nothing happens. On the 100th day, nothing visible has changed. But continue this for years, and eventually that stone develops a groove worn straight through it, shaped entirely by something so soft and small that it seemed incapable of doing anything at all. This is exactly how habits work on a human life. No single small action feels significant enough to matter. One workout does not transform your body. One page read does not make you wise. $1 saved does not make you wealthy. And because each individual action feels insignificant, most people conclude that small actions are not worth the effort. This conclusion, more than almost anything else, is what keeps people stuck in lives they wish were different. The mistake is judging a habit by its immediate result instead of its long-term trajectory. If you measure the value of exercising today by how your body looks tomorrow, you will always be disappointed and you will quit. If you measure the value of exercising today by understanding that this single action is one data point in a pattern that compounds over months and years, everything changes. You stop needing immediate proof. You start trusting the process itself, because you understand that consistency is not asking for instant results. It is asking for accumulated ones. Consider two people who both decide to improve their reading habit. One person reads 10 pages a day. It sounds almost too small to matter, barely enough to notice in a single sitting. The other person decides to wait until they have a large block of free time to read seriously, believing that meaningful reading requires hours at once. A year later, the person reading 10 pages daily has completed somewhere between 15 and 20 books. The person waiting for the perfect large block of time has often read only a handful, because that perfect stretch of free time rarely arrives, and when it does, life usually finds a way to fill it with something else. The smaller, consistent action outperformed the larger, occasional one by an enormous margin, simply because it actually happened repeatedly. This principle applies to every area of life without exception. Financial freedom is rarely built through one massive windfall. It is built through small, boring, repeated decisions, setting aside a portion of income consistently, avoiding unnecessary debt repeatedly, choosing patience over impulse again and again. Physical health is rarely transformed through one extreme program followed for a week before burning out. It is built through moderate, sustainable movement and reasonable eating choices repeated for years. Even relationships follow this same law. A marriage is not strengthened by one grand gesture a year. It is strengthened by small acts of attention and kindness repeated daily, the kind so small they barely seem worth mentioning, yet they are exactly what holds everything together over time. The reason small habits are so easily dismissed is that human beings are wired to notice dramatic change and overlook gradual change. If your life transformed overnight, you would notice immediately and feel motivated to continue. But gradual change is nearly invisible day to day. You will not feel significantly different after 1 week of a new habit. You may not even feel significantly different after 1 month. This invisible period is exactly where most people quit, mistaking the absence of visible results for evidence that the habit is not working. In reality, the habit is working exactly as it should. Growth during this stage is happening beneath the surface, in ways you cannot yet see or measure. The same way a seed planted underground shows no visible sign of life for weeks before finally breaking through the soil. If you dug it up during that invisible period to check on its progress, you would destroy the very thing you were trying to grow. Building habits that last requires making them small enough that failure becomes difficult. Most people attempt dramatic transformation immediately, deciding to exercise for an hour daily, read 50 pages a night, or completely overhaul their diet overnight. This intensity feels motivating in the moment, but it is rarely sustainable, because it demands more willpower and energy than most days can provide. When life gets busy or stressful, which it inevitably will, these oversized commitments collapse entirely, and the person often abandons the habit altogether rather than simply doing a smaller version of it. The better approach is starting so small that skipping the habit feels almost silly. 1 page instead of 50, 5 minutes of movement instead of an hour. A single small habit, done consistently, builds the identity of someone who does not miss days, and that identity becomes far more valuable than the size of any individual action. This connects to something deeper than simple repetition. Every time you complete a small habit, you are not just making progress toward an external result. You are casting a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. Skipping a workout is not just missing one session. It reinforces the identity of someone who quits when things feel inconvenient. Completing that same workout, even a short and imperfect version of it, reinforces the identity of someone who follows through regardless of mood or circumstance. Over months and years, these small votes accumulate into a complete picture of who you actually are, built not from what you intended to do, but from what you actually did, repeatedly, even on days when it would have been easier not to. There is a particular kind of quiet pride that comes from keeping a promise to yourself, even a tiny one, especially on a day when you genuinely did not feel like it. This feeling matters more than people realize. Every time you honor a small commitment despite low motivation, you build trust in yourself. This self-trust becomes the foundation for tackling much larger goals later, because you have proven to yourself, through direct evidence rather than hope, that you are someone who follows through. People who have never built this trust often struggle with larger goals, not because the goals are too difficult, but because deep down they do not fully believe they will actually finish what they start. Small daily habits are how that belief gets built, one completed action at a time. Patience becomes essential here, because the compounding nature of habits means the most significant results often arrive long after the habit has become second nature, sometimes so far removed from the original starting point that people forget the connection entirely. Someone who has read daily for 3 years does not remember the specific day they decided to start. Someone who has saved money consistently for 5 years does not remember the discomfort of the first small deposits. The habit becomes invisible, woven into daily life so completely that it stops feeling like effort at all. This is the endpoint every small habit is moving toward, a state where the beneficial action requires no motivation because it has simply become part of who you are. Start today with something almost embarrassingly small. Choose one habit connected to a result you genuinely want in your life. Make it so easy that missing it feels strange, rather than difficult to complete. Do it today, regardless of mood, energy, or circumstance. Do it again tomorrow. Resist the urge to judge its value by how you feel after a single week, because a week is far too short a window to judge something designed to compound over years. Trust the process the way a farmer trusts a planted seed, tending it daily without demanding proof of growth before it is ready to appear. The life you want is not built through one dramatic leap forward. It is built through thousands of small, unremarkable actions, repeated with a consistency most people are unwilling to maintain. Be willing. That willingness, sustained over time, is the entire difference between the life you have and the life you are capable of building. Chapter 5. Conquer procrastination. By taking action before you feel ready. There is a task sitting on your list right now that you have been avoiding for days, maybe even weeks. You know exactly what it is. It is not that you lack the ability to do it. It is not that you do not have time somewhere in your day to begin it. Something else is holding you back, something quieter and harder to name. You are waiting to feel ready. You are waiting for motivation to arrive, for confidence to build, for the conditions to feel right enough that starting will finally feel easy. This waiting feels reasonable in the moment. It even feels responsible, as if you are simply being thoughtful rather than rushing in unprepared. But here is the truth almost nobody wants to hear. That feeling of readiness you are waiting for rarely arrives before action. It arrives after. Procrastination is often misunderstood as laziness, but this is rarely accurate. Most people who procrastinate are not lazy at all. They are often hard-working in other areas of their life, capable of tremendous effort when the task feels comfortable or urgent enough. Procrastination is not about lacking effort. It is about avoiding discomfort. Every task you delay is delayed because some part of it feels uncomfortable, whether that discomfort is fear of failure, fear of doing it imperfectly, boredom, uncertainty about how to begin, or simply the effort required to start something unfamiliar. Your mind, doing exactly what minds are built to do, steers you away from that discomfort and towards something easier, something that offers relief instead of resistance. Understanding this changes how you fight procrastination, because you stop trying to force motivation and start addressing the actual discomfort underneath the avoidance. The belief that you must feel ready before beginning is one of the most damaging ideas a person can carry, because it hands complete control of your actions over to your emotions. Emotions are unreliable. They shift based on sleep, stress, weather, what someone said to you an hour ago, 100 factors that have nothing to do with whether a task genuinely needs to be done. If you wait for your feelings to align perfectly before taking action, you may wait indefinitely, because feelings of readiness are not something that arrive on command. They are something built through the very act of starting. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. Confidence is a byproduct of action already taken. Think about the last time you dreaded starting something, whether it was a difficult conversation, a demanding project, or an unfamiliar task. And yet once you finally forced yourself to begin, the anxiety that had built up in your mind turned out to be far worse than the actual experience of doing it. This happens constantly, almost universally, because the mind tends to exaggerate the discomfort of an unstarted task far beyond what the task actually delivers once you are inside it. The anticipation is almost always heavier than the action itself. This is not a coincidence, it is a pattern, and recognizing this pattern gives you a powerful tool. The next time you feel dread building around a task, remind yourself directly that the discomfort you are imagining is very likely larger than the discomfort you will actually experience once you begin. One of the most practical tools for overcoming procrastination is deliberately lowering the barrier to starting so far that beginning becomes almost impossible to resist. This means abandoning the idea that you need to complete an entire task in one sitting, and instead committing to something absurdly small. If writing a report feels overwhelming, commit only to writing a single sentence. If cleaning your entire house feels impossible to face, commit only to clearing one surface. If starting a workout program feels daunting, commit only to putting on your workout clothes. This may sound too small to matter, almost silly, but this smallness is exactly the point. Your mind resists large, undefined efforts far more than it resists tiny, specific ones. Once you begin, even with something small, momentum tends to carry you forward naturally, because starting is almost always the hardest part, and everything after that becomes easier by comparison. There is a particular moment right before starting a task you have been avoiding, a moment filled with resistance so strong it can feel almost physical, a tightness in your chest or a heaviness in your thoughts, urging you to wait just a little longer. This moment is temporary. It rarely lasts more than a few minutes once you push through it and actually begin. The mistake most people make is treating this moment of resistance as a signal to stop, when it should actually be treated as a signal that you are exactly where growth happens. Every time you move through this resistance instead of retreating from it, you weaken its grip a little more for the next time it appears. Every time you retreat instead, you strengthen the habit of avoidance, making the next instance of procrastination even easier to fall into. Fear plays a much larger role in procrastination than most people admit to themselves. Often, what looks like laziness or poor time management is actually fear wearing a disguise. Fear of producing something imperfect, fear of being judged, fear of discovering you are not as capable as you hoped. Delaying a task can feel like a way to protect yourself from that fear, because as long as you have not truly attempted something, you cannot truly fail at it. But this protection is an illusion. Avoiding the attempt does not prevent failure. It guarantees a different kind of failure, the failure of never finding out what you were capable of. Facing this fear directly, admitting to yourself that you are avoiding a task because you are afraid, rather than because you are genuinely too busy, is often the first honest step toward finally moving through it. Another powerful shift involves changing how you speak to yourself about the task before you begin. Telling yourself that you have to do something creates resistance almost automatically, because human beings instinctively push back against obligation. Reframing the same task as something you are choosing to do, connected to a goal you genuinely care about, changes the emotional weight of it considerably. This is not about pretending to feel excited when you do not. It is about reconnecting the task to the deeper reason behind it, reminding yourself why this specific effort matters to the life you are trying to build, rather than experiencing it as a random demand, disconnected from any real purpose. Deadlines, even artificial ones you create yourself, are remarkably effective tools against procrastination, because human beings tend to organize their effort around boundaries rather than open-ended time. A task with no deadline can expand indefinitely, stretched across days or weeks, simply because nothing forces it to be finished sooner. Give yourself a specific, even slightly uncomfortable deadline for starting, not necessarily finishing, and treat that deadline seriously. Tell someone else about it if accountability helps you follow through. The specific mechanism matters less than the principle underneath it, which is that clear boundaries around time force action in a way that vague intentions never will. It is worth acknowledging honestly that not every delay is procrastination. Sometimes waiting is wise, when you genuinely need more information or when timing legitimately matters. The difference lies in honesty with yourself about which situation you are actually in. Procrastination is delay driven by discomfort, dressed up as caution. Wisdom is delay driven by genuine necessity. Learning to tell these apart, rather than using the language of caution to disguise simple avoidance, is part of the discipline this chapter is asking you to build. The task waiting on your list right now does not need you to feel ready, it needs you to begin. Readiness is not a gift that arrives before action. It is a state you walk into by taking the first small step, regardless of how unprepared you feel. Every person who has built something meaningful in their life has done so while still afraid, still uncertain, still lacking the full confidence they wished they had before starting. They began anyway, and the beginning itself is what eventually produced the confidence they were originally waiting for. Stop waiting for permission from your own feelings. Choose the smallest possible action connected to what you have been avoiding and take it today, not because you feel ready, but because taking it is the only way readiness will ever arrive. Chapter 6. Protect your energy from people who drain your potential. There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with physical effort. You can sleep a full 8 hours, eat well, exercise regularly, and still walk around feeling completely drained, worn down in a way that rest alone cannot fix. Often, the source of this exhaustion is not inside your body at all. It is sitting across the table from you at lunch. It is on the other end of a phone call that leaves you feeling smaller than before it started. It is in the group chat that fills your evenings with complaints and negativity disguised as connection. Certain people, without ever raising a hand against you, have the power to drain your energy so consistently that you barely notice it happening until you finally step away from them and feel, for the first time in months, what it actually feels like to breathe freely. Energy is not an unlimited resource. This is something most people understand intellectually, but rarely apply practically to the people in their lives. You would never pour water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom and expect it to ever fill up. Yet many people spend years pouring their time, attention, and emotional energy into relationships that leak everything out as fast as it goes in. They do this because walking away feels difficult, sometimes because of guilt, sometimes because of history, sometimes simply because they have never stopped to notice the pattern clearly enough to name it. Naming it is the first step. Until you can clearly identify who and what is draining you, you cannot begin to protect yourself from it. Not every draining relationship looks obviously toxic. Some of the most exhausting people in your life are not cruel or openly hostile. They are simply relentlessly negative, finding something to complain about in nearly every situation, pulling conversations toward what is wrong rather than what is possible. Spending consistent time around this kind of negativity works on you slowly, like water wearing down stone, until you notice your own outlook has shifted without your permission, becoming more pessimistic, more anxious, more focused on problems than solutions. You did not choose this shift consciously. It happened because human beings are deeply influenced by the emotional tone of the people they spend the most time around, whether they intend to absorb that tone or not. Other draining relationships involve people who consistently take without giving anything back in return, whether that is emotional support, practical help, or simple consideration for your time. These relationships often masquerade as friendship or closeness, but the actual pattern reveals something different. You are the one who listens for hours while they are struggling, yet when your own difficulties arise, they are somehow unavailable or uninterested. You are the one who shows up, remembers important details, makes the effort to maintain the connection, while they contribute little beyond their presence when it is convenient for them. This imbalance, repeated over months and years, quietly convinces you that this is simply how relationships work, that giving without receiving is normal, when in truth it is simply exhausting, disguised as normal. There is also a specific kind of person who responds to your ambition and growth not with encouragement, but with subtle discouragement. sometimes disguised as concern or realism. When you share a goal, they immediately point out every reason it might fail. When you make progress, they find a way to minimize it or compare it unfavorably to someone else. This behavior often comes from their own unresolved insecurity, their own unfulfilled dreams reflected uncomfortably back at them by your effort to build something meaningful. This does not mean they are bad people, but their presence in your life during a season of growth can quietly convince you to shrink yourself, to stop reaching, simply to avoid their discomfort with your ambition. Protecting your energy sometimes means limiting exposure to people, however well-meaning, whose presence consistently makes your goals feel smaller rather than more possible. Recognizing these patterns is only the beginning. The harder work is deciding what to do once you see them clearly. This does not always mean cutting people out of your life completely, and it would be unrealistic to suggest that every draining relationship simply gets removed with no complication. Family relationships, work relationships, and long histories with certain people often cannot be erased entirely, nor should they always be. What changes is not necessarily their presence in your life, but the amount of access they have to your time, your attention, and your emotional investment. You can love someone and still limit how much of your energy you give them. You can respect someone and still choose not to engage every time they invite negativity into a conversation. Boundaries are not about punishment, they are about protection, and protecting your energy is not selfish. It is necessary for anyone serious about building a meaningful life. Setting a boundary in practice often looks smaller and quieter than people expect. It might mean shortening a phone call politely instead of staying on the line for an hour of complaints that leave you feeling heavier afterward. It might mean choosing not to share your goals with someone who has consistently responded to past goals with discouragement, protecting your excitement and momentum instead of exposing it to criticism that serves no constructive purpose. It might mean simply spending less time in certain environments, even ones you have spent years in out of habit rather than genuine value. None of this requires dramatic confrontation. Most boundaries are maintained quietly, through small, consistent choices about where your time and attention go, rather than loud declarations announced to everyone around you. There is a fear that often accompanies this kind of boundary setting, a fear that limiting time with certain people makes you cold, ungrateful, or unkind. This fear deserves to be examined honestly rather than simply obeyed. Protecting your own capacity to function, to grow, to remain positive and productive is not cruelty toward others. You cannot pour into your goals, your family, or your genuine relationships from a place that has been emptied out by people who take more than they give. Choosing to protect that capacity is not a betrayal of kindness. It is what makes sustained kindness possible in the first place. A person who allows themselves to be constantly drained eventually has nothing left to offer anyone, including the people who genuinely deserve their presence and energy. On the other side of this equation exists something equally important, and that is surrounding yourself intentionally with people whose presence adds rather than subtracts. Notice how you feel after spending time with certain individuals. Some people leave you feeling inspired, motivated, calmer, more capable than before you saw them. These relationships deserve deliberate investment, more time, more effort, more presence, because they are actively contributing to the person you are trying to become. Just as negativity spreads through consistent exposure, so does ambition, discipline, and genuine positivity. Spending time around people who take their own growth seriously makes your own growth feel more natural, more expected, less like a struggle against your surroundings. This does not mean surrounding yourself only with people who agree with everything you say, or who offer nothing but praise regardless of the situation. Genuine support sometimes includes honest feedback, difficult conversations, and disagreement delivered with respect. The distinction lies in intention. Someone who challenges you because they want to see you improve is fundamentally different from someone who discourages you because your growth makes them uncomfortable. Learning to tell these apart takes honest self-reflection, but the difference is usually felt clearly if you pay attention to how you feel, not just in the moment of the conversation, but afterward, once the words have settled. Take an honest inventory of the people who occupy the largest amount of your time and attention. Ask yourself directly whether each relationship leaves you feeling more capable or less capable, more hopeful or more discouraged, more like the person you are trying to become or further away from them. This inventory is not about judgment or bitterness toward anyone in your life. It is simply about clarity. The same clarity you would want applied to any other resource you were spending carelessly without noticing where it actually went. Your energy, your time, and your emotional capacity are not infinite, and they deserve the same intentional protection you would give to any other valuable resource in your life. Guard them, not out of fear or coldness, but because the life you are building deserves every bit of energy you can bring to it, undiminished by those who would rather see it stay small. Chapter 7. Turn failure into fuel for your next breakthrough. There is a moment that arrives after every significant failure, a moment of silence right after the loss has fully registered, when the noise of disappointment fades just enough for a single question to surface clearly in your mind. What now? This question determines more about your future than the failure itself ever could. Two people can experience the exact same setback, the same rejected proposal, the same failed business, the same relationship that ended, the same goal that collapsed despite months of effort, and walk away with completely different lives because of how they answered that one quiet question in the aftermath. One person lets the failure define them, treating it as proof of their limitations, evidence that they were never good enough to begin with. The other person lets the failure teach them, treating it as information rather than identity, a signal pointing toward what needs to change rather than a verdict on their worth. Failure feels personal because it happens to you, inside your own effort, your own decisions, your own hopes. This makes it almost impossible to view with complete objectivity in the moment it occurs. The sting is real, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Nobody enjoys watching something they worked hard for fall apart. But here is what almost nobody tells you clearly enough, early enough, in a way that actually changes behavior. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is a required ingredient of it. Every person who has built something significant in their life has a long list of failures sitting quietly behind their achievements. Failures that rarely get mentioned in the highlight reel other people see, but without which the eventual success would never have been possible. Consider what failure actually provides that success alone cannot. Success tells you that something worked, but it rarely tells you exactly why, and it certainly does not teach you how to handle obstacles, because by definition, success is the absence of the obstacle winning. Failure, on the other hand, hands you information in its rawest form. It shows you precisely where your approach broke down, where your assumptions were wrong, where your preparation fell short, where your effort needed to be redirected. This information is uncomfortable to receive, but it is also extraordinarily valuable, more valuable in many cases than the comfortable feedback of things simply going right. A person who has never failed at anything significant has also never been forced to develop the deeper skills that only failure demands: resilience, adaptability, the ability to rebuild something from pieces that once felt like complete ruin. The critical difference between people who are destroyed by failure and people who are strengthened by it lies almost entirely in the story they tell themselves about what the failure means. This story is not automatic. It is not handed to you by the event itself. You construct it, often within minutes of the setback occurring, frequently without even realizing you are doing it. If your immediate internal story is that this failure proves you are not capable, not talented enough, not meant for this path, that story will shape every decision that follows, usually toward giving up entirely. But if your internal story treats the failure as a single data point, one specific attempt that did not work under these specific conditions, rather than a permanent verdict on your ability, an entirely different set of decisions becomes available to you. The event is identical in both cases. The outcome for your future is completely different, determined not by what happened, but by what you decided it meant. This does not mean pretending failure does not hurt, or forcing false positivity onto a genuinely painful experience. Toxic optimism, the kind that refuses to acknowledge real pain and rushes straight to silver linings, is not resilience. It is avoidance wearing a cheerful mask. Real strength allows space for the disappointment to be felt fully before moving toward the lesson underneath it. Give yourself permission to feel the weight of what did not work, the frustration, even the grief that sometimes accompanies a significant failure, especially one connected to something you cared about deeply. This feeling does not need to be rushed or suppressed. What matters is that you do not set up permanent residence there, allowing the disappointment to calcify into identity rather than passing through you as a temporary, necessary response to genuine effort that did not pay off this time. Once the initial sting has settled, even slightly, the real work of transformation begins with honest examination rather than either harsh self-criticism or complete avoidance of responsibility. Sit down and ask yourself specific, practical questions rather than vague emotional ones. What exactly did not work? Was it a flaw in the plan itself, a lack of preparation, timing that was simply wrong, factors outside your control that could not have been predicted, or a combination of several elements? This examination requires a particular kind of honesty that many people struggle to access in the aftermath of failure, because there is a strong temptation either to blame yourself entirely, which leads to shame rather than growth, or to blame everything outside yourself entirely, which leads to no growth at all because nothing is identified as within your control to improve. The useful path runs directly between these two extremes, acknowledging what genuinely was within your influence while also recognizing what genuinely was not. Every failure carries within it a specific lesson, sometimes several, but these lessons remain locked away unless you deliberately extract them rather than simply moving past the experience as quickly as possible to avoid discomfort. Write down what you learned, specifically and concretely, not as a vague statement like, "I need to try harder," but as an actual actionable insight. Perhaps you learned that you needed more preparation before attempting something at this scale. Perhaps you learned that a certain relationship or partnership was not the right fit for what you were trying to build. Perhaps you learned that your original timeline was unrealistic, given the resources you actually had available. These specific insights become the raw material for a stronger attempt next time, transforming what felt like a wasted effort into an investment that paid off in knowledge, even though it did not pay off in the way you originally hoped. There is a particular kind of courage required to attempt something again after it has already failed once, a courage that is fundamentally different from the courage required for a first attempt. The first attempt carries hope, untested by experience. The second attempt carries the specific, vivid memory of exactly how badly things can go wrong, which makes stepping forward again considerably harder despite what you have learned. This is precisely why so many people, even talented and capable people, quietly stop trying after a significant failure, not because they lack ability, but because they lack the willingness to risk feeling that specific pain again. Recognizing this pattern in yourself, if it exists, is important, because the goal is not to eliminate the fear of failing again, which is unrealistic, but to act despite that fear being present, understanding that its presence does not disqualify you from moving forward. History offers countless examples of individuals whose most significant achievements were built directly on top of failures that would have ended most people's efforts permanently. These examples are not included here as distant, romanticized stories meant to inspire from a comfortable distance, but as evidence of a pattern that repeats consistently across nearly every field of human achievement. The people who eventually succeeded were not the ones who avoided failure. They were the ones who refused to let failure become the final chapter of their story. They treated each setback as one paragraph in a much longer narrative, rather than the ending itself, and they kept writing new paragraphs even when the previous ones had turned out badly. Consider the specific failure you may be carrying right now, whether recent or from years ago, something that still occasionally surfaces in your thoughts with a familiar sting attached to it. Ask yourself honestly whether you have actually extracted the lesson available inside that experience, or whether you have simply carried the pain of it forward without ever converting it into something useful. It is never too late to go back and do this work, even with old failures, because the lessons inside them remain just as valid and just as available today as they were the moment the failure occurred. Extracting wisdom from a setback is not bound by a deadline. The next time something you have worked toward falls apart, and it will happen again, because failure is not something you eventually outgrow but something you learn to move through more skillfully, remember that this moment is not evidence against you. It is raw material. It is uncomfortable, sometimes deeply painful, but it is not empty. Somewhere inside every failure sits a specific piece of information that, if you are willing to look for it honestly, will make your next attempt stronger than this one was. This is not a comforting story told to soften the reality of loss. It is simply how growth has always worked, for every person who has ever built something meaningful out of a life that did not go according to plan. Chapter 8. Design. A powerful routine that fuels consistent growth. Motivation is unreliable. It shows up strong on a Monday morning after a good night's sleep and a moment of inspiration from somewhere, and then it disappears completely by Wednesday afternoon when life gets heavy and tired and complicated again. Anyone who has tried to build a better life relying purely on motivation already knows this cycle intimately. The burst of enthusiasm, followed by the quiet collapse back into old patterns once that initial energy fades. This is not a personal failing. This is simply how motivation behaves, as an emotion, and emotions were never designed to carry the full weight of long-term change. What carries that weight instead, reliably, day after day, regardless of how you feel, is routine. A well-designed routine does not ask you to feel motivated. It simply asks you to follow the structure you already built, and the structure does the heavy lifting that motivation alone could never sustain. Think of routine as scaffolding around a building still under construction. The scaffolding is not the building itself, but without it, construction becomes far more difficult, more dangerous, more likely to collapse under its own weight before it is finished. A powerful routine works the same way around your goals. It holds everything in place while the deeper work of growth happens slowly underneath it, giving your days a shape that does not depend on however you happen to feel when you open your eyes. This is precisely why people who build consistent, meaningful routines tend to outperform people who rely purely on willpower and inspiration, not because they are more talented or more disciplined by nature, but because they removed the daily requirement of deciding, from scratch, whether today would be a day they showed up for themselves. Designing a routine that actually works begins with brutal honesty about your current life, rather than borrowing someone else's schedule and expecting it to fit you perfectly. A routine copied directly from someone with different responsibilities, different energy patterns, and a different stage of life will almost always fail. Not because the routine itself is flawed, but because it was never built for the actual shape of your days. Before designing anything, take an honest look at when your energy is naturally highest, when your obligations are fixed and unmovable, and when you genuinely have flexibility to work with. Some people think most clearly in the early morning hours before the world wakes up. Others find their sharpest focus late in the evening, once the noise of the day has quieted down. Neither is correct or incorrect. What matters is building your routine around your actual patterns, rather than someone else's ideal version of productivity. A powerful routine is built in layers, rather than all at once. Attempting to overhaul your entire day immediately, adding exercise, reading, meditation, deep work, and a dozen other beneficial habits simultaneously, almost always collapses within days under its own weight. This is one of the most common mistakes people make when trying to transform their life quickly, mistaking intensity for effectiveness. Instead, choose one or two anchor habits to build first. Activities significant enough to shape the feeling of your day, but simple enough to maintain even during difficult weeks. Once these anchors have become stable, woven into your day without requiring constant willpower to maintain, add the next layer. This gradual construction feels slower in the beginning, but it produces a routine that actually survives contact with real life, rather than an ambitious plan that exists only on paper for the first few days before disappearing entirely. Consistency matters more than perfection when it comes to timing. A routine that happens at slightly different times depending on the day, but happens every single day without fail, is far more valuable than a rigid schedule followed perfectly for 2 weeks before falling apart completely under the pressure of its own inflexibility. Some days will bring unexpected demands, emergencies, exhaustion that could not have been planned around. A powerful routine bends without breaking, adjusting its timing when necessary, while protecting its core actions from being skipped entirely. This flexibility is not weakness. It is what allows a routine to survive long enough to become permanent, rather than existing only during ideal conditions that rarely last. Every strong routine needs clear boundaries marking its beginning and its end, moments that signal to your mind that one phase of the day is closing and another is opening. Without these boundaries, days blur together into an undefined stretch of obligation, making it far harder to protect time for growth, because nothing clearly separates work from rest, effort from recovery. Consider building a specific closing ritual at the end of your productive hours, something as simple as writing down what you accomplished and what remains for tomorrow, signaling clearly to your mind that today's effort is complete and deliberate rest can now begin without guilt. This closing boundary matters as much as any opening ritual, because a mind that never receives a clear signal to rest eventually burns out, regardless of how disciplined its owner intended to be. Rest itself deserves a deliberate place within a powerful routine, rather than being treated as something that only happens when everything else has already been completed, which for most ambitious people means it rarely happens at all. Growth is not produced purely by effort. It is produced by effort followed by genuine recovery, the same way physical muscle grows not during the workout itself, but during the rest that follows it. A routine that only accounts for productivity while ignoring recovery will eventually produce diminishing returns, then burnout, then complete abandonment of the very goals it was designed to support. Build specific time into your routine, whether that is 30 minutes in the evening or a full day each week, that exists purely for restoration, without guilt, without the nagging feeling that you should be doing something more productive instead. A routine also needs regular review, because the version that works for you today will not necessarily work for you in 6 months, as your responsibilities shift, your goals evolve, and your capacity changes. Set aside time periodically, perhaps once a month, to honestly evaluate whether your current routine is still serving the life you are actually trying to build, or whether it has become an outdated structure you are following out of habit rather than genuine usefulness. This review is not an invitation to abandon consistency at the first sign of difficulty, since some resistance is simply part of maintaining any meaningful habit. Rather, it is an opportunity to distinguish between temporary difficulty that simply requires persistence and genuine misalignment that requires actual adjustment. The specific activities that fill your routine matter far less than most people assume, compared to the simple fact of having a routine at all. 2 people can follow completely different daily structures, one centered around early exercise and quiet reflection, another centered around late-night creative work and structured planning sessions, and both can experience significant growth, because the real power lies not in the specific activities chosen, but in the reliability of showing up for them, regardless of mood or circumstance. This is worth remembering whenever you find yourself comparing your routine to someone else's, tempted to abandon what works for you simply because it looks different from what works for someone you admire. Building a routine that fuels genuine growth is ultimately an act of self-respect, disguised as scheduling. Every time you follow through on the structure you built for yourself, even on days when motivation is completely absent, you reinforce a quiet but powerful message that your goals matter enough to be protected by something more reliable than fleeting emotion. Over months and years, this reliability becomes the foundation upon which everything else you are trying to build actually stands. Design your days deliberately, protect the structure you create, and allow that structure, rather than your unpredictable feelings, to carry you consistently toward the life you are working to build. Chapter 9. Guard your time like your most valuable treasure. If someone reached into your wallet and took a portion of your money without asking, you would notice immediately, and you would react. You would feel violated, angry, determined to get it back or at least prevent it from happening again. Yet every single day, people allow something far more valuable than money to be taken from them without a single word of protest. Time disappears into meetings that did not need to happen, conversations that drained more than they gave, obligations agreed to out of guilt rather than genuine desire, and hours spent on activities that align with nobody's priorities but somehow still fill entire evenings. Nobody stole this time through force. It was given away freely, often without full awareness that it was even happening, and this is precisely what makes time so much easier to lose than money. Time loss often triggers nothing at all, until years have passed and someone finally looks back wondering where it all went. Money can be earned again. A bad financial year can be followed by a better one. Debts can be repaid. Savings can be rebuilt. Time carries no such mercy. Every hour spent today is permanently gone, unrecoverable through any amount of future effort, unreplaceable by any amount of future success. This single fact, so simple that it almost sounds obvious, is rarely treated with the seriousness it deserves. People budget their money carefully, tracking expenses, planning for the future, feeling genuine distress over unnecessary purchases, while treating their time with careless generosity, handing hours away to anyone who asks, without pausing to consider whether that exchange actually serves the life they claim to want. Part of the reason time feels less precious than money in daily experience is that its supply feels endless in the moment, even though it absolutely is not. Tomorrow always seems to exist. Another day always seems available. And this illusion of abundance makes today's hours feel less urgent than they truly are. Nobody wakes up believing they have an infinite number of days remaining, yet almost everyone lives as though they do, postponing meaningful work, meaningful relationships, and meaningful rest in favor of whatever feels easiest or most urgent in the immediate moment. The truth, uncomfortable as it is to sit with directly, is that every person has a finite and unknown number of days remaining, and no amount of achievement, wealth, or success can purchase a single additional hour once that supply runs out. This is not meant to create fear but clarity, because clarity about time's actual scarcity is exactly what motivates people to finally start guarding it seriously. Guarding your time begins with a willingness to say no, a word that feels simple in theory and remarkably difficult in practice for most people. Saying yes feels easier in the moment, avoiding the discomfort of disappointing someone, avoiding the awkwardness of a direct refusal, avoiding the guilt that often accompanies protecting your own priorities over someone else's request. But every yes given to something that does not matter is simultaneously a no given to something that does, even if that something is never named directly. Every hour spent in a meeting that could have been an email is an hour stolen from a project that actually moves your life forward. Every evening spent on an obligation accepted out of guilt is an evening stolen from rest, from family, from the quiet space your mind needs to think clearly. Learning to say no, calmly, and without over-explaining yourself is one of the most direct ways to reclaim ownership over your own hours. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes from identifying your actual priorities in specific, concrete terms, rather than vague, general categories. Nearly everyone would say they value their family, their health, their career, and their personal growth, if asked directly. Yet very few people can say specifically how many hours per week they intend to protect for each of these areas. Vague priorities produce vague protection. Specific priorities produce specific boundaries. Sit down and decide, honestly and in writing, what actually deserves your time based on what you claim to value, and then compare this list against how your actual hours are currently being spent. This comparison is often uncomfortable, revealing a significant gap between stated values and actual time allocation, but this discomfort is valuable because it cannot be addressed until it is first seen clearly. Tracking your time for even a single week, honestly and without judgment, often reveals patterns that remain invisible without this kind of direct observation. Most people significantly underestimate how many hours disappear into activities they would not consciously choose if asked directly. Scrolling through screens, watching content chosen more out of habit than genuine interest, engaging in conversations that leave them feeling worse rather than better. This is not an exercise in guilt or self-criticism. It is simply information, the same way a business owner tracks expenses not to feel ashamed of spending money, but to understand exactly where resources are going, so better decisions can be made going forward. Once you can see clearly where your hours actually go, you gain the power to redirect them deliberately rather than continuing to lose them passively. Protecting time also requires recognizing that not all hours carry equal value, and treating them as though they do is a mistake that limits how effectively you can guard what matters most. The first few hours after waking, before fatigue and accumulated stress have worn down your mental sharpness, are typically far more valuable than the hours late in the evening when energy and focus have naturally declined. Guarding your time intelligently means protecting your highest value hours for your highest value work, rather than allowing those precious hours to be consumed by minor tasks simply because they happen to arrive first in the day. Save the easier, lower stakes tasks for periods when your energy is naturally lower, and reserve your sharpest hours for whatever matters most in your life right now. There is also a discipline required in protecting time from yourself, not just from other people and outside obligations. Many hours are lost, not to external demands, but to internal avoidance, choosing distraction over difficulty, choosing comfort over the effort that genuine progress requires. This connects directly to everything discussed about procrastination and focus throughout this book, because guarding your time ultimately requires guarding your own choices in the moment, refusing to let comfort quietly steal hours that were meant for something more meaningful. Every time you choose the harder, more valuable use of an hour over the easier, more comfortable one, you are actively protecting your time rather than simply hoping it protects itself. Consider the people and activities currently occupying your calendar and ask honestly whether each one deserves the space it currently holds. Some commitments, once examined honestly, no longer serve any real purpose beyond habit or obligation carried forward from a version of your life that no longer exists. Removing these commitments, even gradually, frees up space for the priorities that actually matter now, rather than the priorities that mattered years ago when the commitment was first made. This kind of honest audit, repeated periodically, prevents your calendar from becoming a museum of past obligations rather than a living reflection of your current values. Time, unlike nearly every other resource discussed in this book, cannot be recovered once lost, cannot be earned back through extra effort, cannot be borrowed from a future that has not yet arrived. This singular fact should change how seriously you treat every single hour available to you. Guard your mornings, guard your focused hours, guard your relationships with people who add rather than drain, guard your rest, and guard your no as fiercely as you would guard anything else you consider genuinely valuable. The life you are trying to build is made entirely from hours, one after another, and how you choose to spend them today is quietly determining the shape of the life you will be living years from now. Treat this treasure with the seriousness it deserves, because unlike everything else that can be lost and rebuilt, time spent poorly today is time that no future effort can ever return to you. Chapter 10. Commit to lifelong discipline to join the elite 1%. Everything in this book has led to this final, quiet truth. None of the principles discussed so far, mastering your mornings, eliminating distraction, building focus, developing habits, overcoming procrastination, protecting your energy, learning from failure, designing a routine, and guarding your time mean anything if they are practiced for a week and then abandoned once life gets difficult again. The difference between someone who reads about transformation and someone who actually becomes transformed is not intelligence, talent, or even circumstance. It is a single word that carries far more weight than its simplicity suggests. Discipline. Not discipline as punishment, not discipline as harsh self-denial, but discipline as a form of ongoing commitment to the person you are choosing to become, sustained not for a week or a month, but for the rest of your life. Most people who attempt meaningful change understand this on some level, yet still find themselves back in old patterns within weeks. This happens because discipline is often misunderstood as a feeling you either have or do not have on any given day, rather than as a decision made repeatedly regardless of feeling. On difficult days, and there will be many of them, motivation offers nothing. It has already left the building, gone quiet exactly when it would be most convenient to have it present. Discipline is what remains when motivation disappears. It is the willingness to follow through on what you decided mattered during a clear moment of thinking, even now, in a moment when your mind is offering 100 reasons to skip it just this once. The word elite, when applied to the 1% who never waste time, does not refer to talent, luck, or privileged circumstances. It refers to something far more accessible and far more demanding at the same time, a willingness to keep showing up long after everyone else around them has quietly stopped. Most people start strong. The gym is full in January and nearly empty by March. Ambitious plans are announced with excitement and abandoned within weeks once the initial motivation fades and the real, unglamorous work of consistency begins. This pattern repeats endlessly across every area of life, not because people lack good intentions, but because good intentions were never designed to survive contact with boredom, difficulty, and the absence of immediate results. The 1% are not the people who never feel like quitting. They are the people who continue anyway, specifically because they understand that feelings are unreliable narrators when it comes to long-term commitment. There is a particular moment that separates those who eventually succeed from those who eventually give up, and it rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It is the ordinary Tuesday evening when nobody is watching, when the day has already been long and tiring, when skipping the habit would be easy to justify and impossible for anyone else to even notice. In this small, unremarkable moment, a decision gets made that determines far more than it appears to in that instant. Choosing to follow through anyway, even imperfectly, even with less energy than usual, casts a vote for the identity of someone who does not quit when things get inconvenient. Choosing to skip it, again and again across similar unremarkable moments, casts a vote for the opposite identity, someone who only follows through when conditions are ideal, which in real life is rarely the case for very long. Lifelong discipline requires releasing the fantasy that consistency will eventually become effortless, that there exists some future point where discipline stops requiring active choice and simply happens automatically without resistance. While habits can become easier over time, genuinely woven into daily life until they require far less conscious effort than they once did, the deeper commitment to growth, to continuing even when results are slow, to choosing difficulty over comfort in service of a larger goal, never fully disappears as a source of resistance. This is not discouraging news, though it may sound that way at first. It is liberating, because it removes the false belief that something is wrong with you simply because discipline still occasionally feels difficult, even after months or years of practice. It is supposed to feel difficult sometimes. That difficulty is not a sign of failure. It is simply the ongoing price of a meaningful life, paid in small installments rather than one overwhelming sum. Commitment to lifelong discipline also requires redefining what success actually looks like on a daily basis, moving away from dramatic, visible achievements as the only measure of progress and toward the quieter, more honest measure of whether you showed up for yourself today. Society tends to celebrate finish lines, launches, promotions, visible transformations, while remaining largely blind to the thousands of ordinary days that made those visible moments possible. This creates a distorted picture in most people's minds, believing that discipline should feel exciting and rewarding on a daily basis, when in truth, the vast majority of disciplined days feel completely unremarkable, indistinguishable from any other day, except for the quiet fact that you followed through anyway. Learning to find genuine satisfaction in these unremarkable days, rather than waiting for external recognition to validate your effort, is essential for sustaining discipline across years rather than weeks. There will be seasons in your life when discipline feels significantly harder to maintain than others, periods of grief, illness, overwhelming stress, or circumstances entirely outside your control that make even basic consistency feel like an enormous effort. Lifelong discipline does not mean rigid, unforgiving perfection regardless of what life presents you with. It means returning, again and again, to the practices that matter, even after periods of disruption, without treating those disruptions as permanent failures that disqualify you from ever being disciplined again. The person who falls off their routine during a difficult season and returns to it 3 weeks later is still practicing discipline, perhaps even more meaningfully than someone who never faced genuine adversity in the first place. What separates lifelong discipline from a temporary phase is not the absence of interruption, but the consistent decision to return after every interruption, no matter how many times that return becomes necessary. Joining the elite 1% who never waste time is not a destination you arrive at and then permanently occupy without further effort. It is a daily practice, renewed each morning through the same small decisions discussed throughout this entire book. Protecting your mornings, guarding your focus, building small, consistent habits, taking action before you feel ready, protecting your energy from those who drain it, extracting wisdom from failure instead of being destroyed by it, designing routines that support rather than depend on motivation, and guarding your time as the finite, irreplaceable resource it actually is. None of these principles work in isolation, and none of them work as a one-time effort. They work only through repetition, sustained across months and years, until they stop feeling like separate practices and simply become the way you naturally move through your life. This is the final truth worth carrying forward from everything discussed in this book. The gap between the life you currently have and the life you are capable of building is rarely closed through a single dramatic decision. It is closed through thousands of small, disciplined choices, made consistently, especially on the days when nobody would notice or care whether you followed through. Every principle in this book is available to you starting today, not as a distant goal reserved for people with more time, more resources, or more natural discipline than you currently have, but as a direct, immediate choice available in this very moment. The 1% who never waste time were not born into that category. They chose it, repeatedly, one ordinary day at a time, until that choice became who they simply are. That same choice is sitting in front of you right now, waiting only for your decision to pick it up and carry it forward, not just for today, but for the rest of your life.